Thank you, dear Professor Mathilde, that you find the time to speak with us about the cities in the framework of the project City as a Classroom. Professor Mathilde, your PhD thesis was done on the extraordinary topic, the evolving forms and structures of the Mediterranean multi-city, new models of urban thinking and perspective on modern design. Could you please share with us what these new models of urban thinking are? What are the futures of the Mediterranean multi-cities?
Okay, so that's that's a really big question, but I'll try and sort of give you the starting points or the basis from which I came from. When I started my PhD, I was working also in a series of different research projects, one of which was looking at the coast of the west of Italy, and how this area is planned in very different sort of sectorial sectors, let's say, but not only sectors, but also each kind of administrative area didn't have a zone of overlap. So there were a series of small sort of comune, they're called in Italian, so administrative areas, but in reality, this coastal system functioned as the body of one single system. So there was, to some extent, a discrepancy between the planning tools or the way in which the planning tools that we have work and the way in which the territory in reality functions. So from that, I started to question what or how we define a city, you know, like what is a city? And so I was born and grew up in Australia, and then I moved to Europe to study architecture. And I became also very passionate about the Mediterranean culture, the Mediterranean context, which is a very particular context. So my interest was to sort of question how we had defined cities up until now, and sort of study it through the kind of speculative lens of questioning, you know, what happens if we consider the whole of the Mediterranean as the body of a single city? What kind of paradigms emerge from that sort of research or that sort of vision of the city? And so I started studying a series of research projects, among these, for example, Catalonia, or other projects of this sort, and sort of projects that questioned the fact that we could give a fixed parameters or fixed criteria to define a city. And so from that, I sort of started looking at what happens on the Mediterranean coast, because as you probably know, there are many points of the Mediterranean coast where there is a sort of like a continuous urban development. So if you look at, for example, from the south of Spain all the way through and around the coast of Italy, fundamentally, you have very few spaces in which there is actually a break, which maybe consists in a national park. But, you know, if we change perspective and we start looking at this as the body of a single city, then these parks become the parks or urban parks for this Mediterranean multi-city. And I say multi-city because in reality, we do refer back to sort of different cultural, there is like the Mediterranean is also very interesting because it refers to one single culture, which is the Mediterranean culture. So people often identify, living in the Mediterranean, people often identify with this Mediterranean culture. But notwithstanding that, if you zoom in the micro scale, there are sort of like different facets of this culture. So it isn't exactly one city, although in many points, multiple cities function as one urban continuum also for the society who inhabit this space, but yet it is still a multifaceted city. So it's not a sort of homogeneous body of urban continuum. And so I sort of started looking at understanding where there were maybe polarities. So where 2 points were attracting to each other. So for example, there's a super simple example in the south of Italy, of Reggio Calabria and Catania. There's maybe some like urban continuums. So for example, already the coast of Catalonia, people don't necessarily live in Barcelona, but they maybe work in Barcelona and travel from the coastal region around it. The same thing happens in Genoa in Italy, where I lived. And then sort of like this kind of networked city that sort of starts to develop. So this was a little bit the basis of my PhD. And within that, I also questioned the way in which we represent cities. So the dynamicity with which cities are embodied is something that we can no longer sort of truly, to some extent, represent with static cartographies. Again, as I was saying, I was also questioning the tools that we use to design cities. So what are the urban planning tools? How long do they stay in place? How long does it take for them to become realistic? Like, sorry, not realistic, but for them to begin to be actuated. So we're talking about a process that varies between 5 to 10 years according to where you are. And within those 5 to 10 years, the city has already drastically changed with the pace at which evolution is happening today. So it was a lot of questioning. I don't have all the answers, but I've begun to sort of gather thoughts about this.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting. You are, as an expert in architecture, you did interdisciplinary research on the modern urban approaches to design. In your opinion, what are the current architectural solutions in construction design of cities? Perhaps there are differences in approaches in Europe from other regions in the world.
I mean, I think to go to the second question first, of course, there are different approaches because, you know, a city is the place or the space in which the cultures of the society that inhabit this space come together. So of course, every city is different. Every approach is different because it relates then back to the culture. For me, I think, for example, I'm head of studies at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. And so we work around this concept of advanced architecture, which is sort of advanced architecture is in some way defined in this change in paradigm, or this moment of change in paradigm, where architecture is no longer just physical, but also digital. So the relationship between technology and architecture and how technology could potentially help enhance architecture and vice versa. And I think in that sense, for us, there's a lot of interest in the research that we're doing today, in particular, maybe in relation to the concept of smart cities. So often the smart city was a very sort of top-down approach where technology was embedded into the city to help manage it. But I think what we really need to work on, and what we're trying to work on, is also understand how this technology can not only enhance the performance of the city, but enhance the performance of the citizens in relationship to this city. So working together with the inhabitants. And actually, I have to say, Barcelona is a pretty amazing place to be with respect to that. I don't know if you know, but Barcelona in 2014 won the iCapital Award, which was awarded, it was the first time that the European Commission awarded the award, gave the award. And the city of Barcelona actually won the award because Barcelona implements technologies to bring its citizens closer to the city itself. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn from cities like Barcelona to push this kind of not just top-down approach, but also bottom-up approach and understanding, and how these two systems can begin to allow the city to perform in different ways. So perform from sort of resources and material flows, but also social and cultural flows, and how these can then be integrated towards kind of like the development of responsible but also responsive designs for our urban areas.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's really interesting. Yeah, if you compare it, like example, with Italian architecture,
Mhm.
What do you think? Italian architecture much more modern for now, or still to keep some tradition?
In comparison with Italian cities?
Like example, comparing with Spanish cities for now.
Well, I don't, it's complicated because it's all in the Mediterranean region,
It's
no? So
different.
it
It's
has a lot
different,
of
yeah.
like, yeah, cultural similarities maybe, or specificities. Um, I think that maybe Barcelona is a city that probably a lot of cities in Italy can learn from. I always say that for me, Barcelona is a Mediterranean city where everything works. And the city that I lived in Italy wasn't necessarily like that. And it's quite interesting because there's like a parallelism between the city that I was living in Italy and the city of Barcelona in terms of large scale interventions or events rather that allowed to really transform the city. I don't know like what I would say. There's also a lot that we can learn from Italian cities, you know, so in the way in which they grew, they shaped. Barcelona is also a kind of exception because the city was contained until very late. So mid 1800s, it was completely contained basically within the historical center. So the city itself is a workshop, no? Because it's a workshop for urbanism, you know, the plan that Ildefonso Cerdà designed, and he designed it based on data, based on scientific studies of how cities were functioning and how he imagined these cities could function in an optimized manner in terms of spatial distribution. So he was actually capable, or he had the very unique opportunity to sort of build a one-to-one scale prototype of how this city could evolve. Whereas other cities, for example, like Paris, had already well exploded outside of the historical center. And so they had another kind of approach where they had to sort of retrofit or refurbish the city in itself to be able to allow it to become adequate for like health issues or societal needs. So for example, the opening of Boulevard and other things like that. So Barcelona is kind of an exception in that sense, but nonetheless, it's a very exciting exception because it is, in fact, like a workshop. It's a one-to-one scale prototype of what someone thought the city should be. And in that sense, I think it's an incredibly interesting place to be. And I think that Barcelona hasn't lost this idea of, you know, hasn't lost this idea of experimenting within the city, of being experimental in its approaches with all the possible sort of like failures that could come with this. I don't know, a great example is a couple of years ago, the concept of a superblock was actuated, the first superblock in the Eixample. I mean, they had already actuated a series of superblocks, for example, in Gracia in the historical center. But the first superblock in the Eixample was actuated just actually near here, near where I'm working at IAC. And so they were looking at the possibility of sort of redesigning how the city sort of like vehicular access was functioning. So instead of having each of the roads with full vehicular access, what they did was they made a 3x3 grid of these blocks and pedestrianized the internal streets of these blocks and kept the exterior streets for vehicular traffic, with just one lane of traffic so that you could actually access the interior area of the blocks. But this also allows to free up a lot of public space for citizens. Engages also with other things, other challenges that we need to sort of look at with cities today. So for example, the issues related to the loss of biodiversity or urban green or things like that, where the superblock allows you by freeing up this space to sort of tackle these issues and consequently tackle other very big issues such as air pollution and other things like, and noise pollution that sort of are incumbent in Barcelona. And so since then, Barcelona has actuated other superblocks in other parts of the city. So it's been it was a very sort of like out there experiment within an urban context. But with all its challenges, in the end, it became sort of a successful model that the city in itself is reinvesting in. And I think that's very exciting.
It's true. You mentioned about prototypes. My next question exactly about this. In your article, Experimentation, Prototyping, and Digital Technologies Towards One-to-One in Architectural Education, you are considering prototyping and digital technology. Could you please share with us what kind of prototypes are used in architecture today?
Okay, so this article, which was written with two of my colleagues, Alexandre Dubord and Pablo Ros, we were discussing the use of prototyping in one-to-one scale within the realm of architectural education. And we were interested in that sort of approach because we believe that in some way our approach to architecture within IAC is on one side a multi-scalar and multidisciplinary approach. So we work through different scales, from the material scale to, or from bits to geographies, as we say, but from the material scale to the sort of architectural scale and then beyond. So understanding the impact of these. But we also work in a learning by doing manner. So some of the best ways to understand how the building process works on an architectural scale is to actually take an active role within it. And often when we study architecture, we don't get that many opportunities to take part in construction or have a very active role in construction. And I think it's really important, as we do in IAC, to be able to actuate prototypes, because it gives the students the possibility on one hand to build sometimes their first project, but also to be able to have that experience within a sort of a protected area, no? Together with a series of mentors and researchers who have some experience within this, and so can sort of share their experience and hence learning by doing. And I think that we here at IAC, we consider this very important, this idea of learning by doing. We also consider that the development of design through research or by research is also very important. So the impact or the let's say the contribution of our work is very important to us. We want to develop meaningful projects. We're not interested in speculating for the sake of speculating. We're interested in understanding how we can, through the research that we do, but also through the educational programs that we develop, how we can positively impact the space that we inhabit towards a better future for our planet. So I guess.
Thank you so much. Can you give some examples of the prototypes? What, like, example you explain or show to your students?
Okay, so I will give you actually an example. We don't show them to our students, we develop them with our students. So for example, in this actuation of the superblock that I was discussing before, which was actually designed by the Urban Ecology Agency of Barcelona, which was led by Salvador Rueda. In the first week of the superblock, the different architecture and design schools of Barcelona were invited to occupy some of this newly found public space. And so together with our students and within the framework of an EU project called Active Public Space, which was looking at how we can activate public space through new technologies to enhance its performance, we developed a participatory design platform called Poble Joc. So what we did was we designed with the students a series of modules that were then fabricated in our fabrication laboratories here at the Institute. And these modules took on like a different sort of connotation each. So we had a module that represented a market. We had a module that was working with vegetation. We had a module which we designed as a ping pong table representing sort of sports and activities. And all of these modules were mobile. So we wheeled them out to the superblock with our students. And our interest was to create a situation where we could engage citizens to actively design the space that they inhabit. So this newly found public space was occupied by these movable modules, and people could come through the space and move these modules around so that they could design the urban space that they desired according to the elements that we had available. So what the students, what we did then was that every time a person who would move one of these modules, they would mark on the ground where they were placing it. And then we flew a drone over the top of that to be able to collect the data of where these modular elements were positioned and map these different ideas of public space, or not ideas, but different sort of arrangements of public space that the citizens who were living or moving through the area wanted in this area. And so in the evenings, we would project these maps on one of the modules so that people could also see and have feedback on how their space was designed. So the idea was to create an active, active public space, an adaptive public space, so a space that people could sort of design as they needed, or which could respond to their desires. And it was also like enhanced through the activation of an augmented reality app, which through the use of a QR code, you could get more information about the specific topic of the module. So for example, in the sports module, there was information about the different areas where there were sports facilities or events. We had also on a module dedicated to vegetation, what kind of plants you could grow in that point of the year. And so it was also a productive public space, no? So it becomes an interactive space that allows citizens to actively engage with the design of the space, but also learn from this space because they can get more information. And so I think that would be one example of prototyping. Then the idea of like gamification, or gamification for to allow citizens to actively engage in the design of their public space. We took that to another level within our Master in City and Technology, where we worked with students to develop a gaming platform called Super Barrio, which we've been continuing to develop as the Institute grows. And this was a gaming platform which, instead of being physical modules within the space, through a digital interface, people can start to sort of design the public space and actively participate or actively share their needs and their desires and their views on how public space should be designed.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really interesting because you also cooperation with the people who live there. So it's
definitely.
The experience. It's really interesting. It's true. If we compare 18th, 19th century and modern approach to the city building or city design, what was different back then in terms of strategy and the end results? Do you think our ancestors were better than modern urbanists, in your opinion?
This is a very difficult question. I think that we have a lot to learn from how cities have evolved, of course, and I think it's fundamental to study it and understand, you know, what were the reasons behind these decisions. One thing that I can say that is definitely different today is the technology. So we have the possibility to sort of collect data, for example, in real time and understand the city in real time, which is something that was not necessarily possible for our ancestors. We also have the computational power to be able to process this data and use it to develop data-driven design solutions. So not only understand the city in a different way or with a different resolution to some extent, but also actively use this information within the design. So I think that this would be, for me, the main difference, you know, our capacity to sort of understand urban areas in different layers, so both physical and digital, but also process this information and use this information towards the development of responsive and responsible design solutions. Now, whether it's better or worse, I'm not going to express my opinion. As I said, I think we've got a lot to learn from the past, and we will have a lot more to learn from the future.
Thank you so much. You said that about the building of the ancient also have some information what give to the people. Exactly, this is the last question of mine, because our framework of our project, its term subject, it's city as a classroom. Exactly. It is believed that different cities influence us in different ways and teach us on the different levels, like example, sociologically, anthropologically, etc. In your viewpoint, in which ways does cities design and architecture influence people?
I would say in many, many ways. I mean, if you think about it, the city and the architecture is the space that we inhabit, no? So it impacts us because it impacts the way we move through space fundamentally. So I think there's a very direct relationship with us. I think in teaching or in educational activities, it's super important to go out into the city or to go out with architecture and really engage actively within this realm to be able to, on one side, learn from it, but also to be able to understand what are the implications of design solutions that we activate. How does this impact, you know, the society? So we need to speak to people. We need to have an understanding of the sociological or psychological impacts of the city. You know, so there's in some way a constant feedback there. And the other thing is that we need to be constantly open to learning more, because as I was saying, the spaces that we inhabit, or the evolution, the pace of the evolution of the spaces that we inhabit is becoming faster and faster. So the way in which, or the pace at which we have to some extent respond to this needs to also, you know, replicate that sort of speed. So I think that we need to sort of constantly have this feedback between designers, society, the urban spaces that we live in, the information that comes from these, to be able to sort of, you know, like really engage actively in being on point with the responses that we give, you know. So I think that, you know, we have the possibility to learn a lot from cities, a lot from citizens, a lot from the environment, and we need to really actively engage. And in education, we need to empower people to be able to actively respond to the situations that they find themselves in. So that's really important. We need to understand that we can have an impact, that we should, in my opinion, have a positive impact, and that we can shape the future of our habitat.